Well, hey folks, it's your old pal King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. Uh, as I've discussed a few times recently, I've recently been able to actually start exploring Dark Sun more fully because I finally gotten a copy of the old Complete Psionics Handbook for AD&D, and I've been rolling up a few characters just to kind of get a better feel for the specific rules that Dark Sun has. And also just to refresh myself on AD&D character creation because it's been like well over 2 decades since I've even made an AD&D character at all, and I've rolled like 5 up the other night. Um, and after doing so, I guess I have a few observations of comparison between AD&D and modern day D&D 5th edition. Um, Beyond just kind of generalizing based on like old memories kind of stuff. I still feel like it qualifies for being called advanced. It is a little bit more complicated. In some ways, though, I feel like it's a bit more nuanced because of that. You have to be very like choosy with your skills, and there's a lot of skills to choose from, and they don't give you a lot of slots, which kind of makes intelligence kind of like low-key a more important ability score because it gives you potentially more skill slots, whether or not you're going to be using it as a magic user. It's still good to be a smart fighter because you might want to have more than 3 whole skills out of a list of like 30 to 50, just in like the basic player's handbook alone. The ability scores, even if you're using Dark Sun's like more enhanced ability score dice dynamics, even just using the classic AD&D, both of them, like, you have to qualify to have your race of choice or your class of choice. You really can't go into the game with a specific concept in mind. It's like you're going to roll your ability scores and see what you qualify for. There's a lot of times where you're just like that right there sometimes just makes people like have to choose human because you might not get to have a good enough dexterity or whatever to be able to play an elf. And at Dark Sun, like I've rolled up 5 characters, not a single one of them had a high enough strength to be able to qualify for half giant. I barely was able to get one with a high enough dexterity to be a Thri-kreen. You have to not only pass that hurdle, you also have to hurdle into the class. So I was trying to I want to do like 2 of the more iconic character classes for Dark Sun amongst this assortment just to kind of get a feel for how their character creation is. And have not been able to qualify for psionics up until the very end. And on that character, I had to make them a halfling in order to be able to bump their wisdom up high enough. It's interesting. It like like I said, you can't really go into it with like a concept already in mind like you can with 5th edition or pretty much all of the Wizards of the Coast editions. We're pretty like open about like you can pretty much come in playing what you want. Even if you roll bad, like their default attribute and ability score, distribution stuff is all like, here's 6 preset numbers and use these, or roll as much dice as you want and choose the best dice. Have everything be 18, yay. Kind of a approach to making this more player friendly because they want to get more people to play the game. It's the exact same kind of mirror problem that video games have in some ways of, people wanting the games to have easy mode that don't have easy mode and all that kind of stuff. And that's what I mean, like, it still earns having the advanced in its title, and I still think it's perfectly worth playing, especially since you can get these, like, way cheaper. Like, this is only, like, $20 plus whatever the delivery costs. Like, even with that factored in, like, brand new, it's like half the price of what a brand new copy of the player's handbook and the other various books are. As core rule books, gives you way much more like actual like information, like smaller, more condensed text, less art. If there's anything to really complain about, is that you have to flip around throughout it a little bit towards the end of character creation to find your THAC0 and your savings throw. But the way you use the rules kind of like dictates the feel of the thing. I'm a big believer that the character sheet is the controller and interface that the player has for the entire game, and so the rules system that you use at least in play, regardless of whatever the game itself is proposing, you should largely focus on using the rules that actually tie into things on the player's character sheet, so they feel like there was a reason why they wrote all these numbers down at the very beginning that they don't know does what. You don't want to leave them as an appendix. That's why if there's an overall complaint I have about a lot of role-playing games is I kind of don't think they take equipment quite enough. That always feels like an addendum that quite a few players are kind of like tired of making their character by that point, and so they end up making poor choices on their equipment, or maybe that is the reason why they do that way, and it's all some sort of like subtle psychological trick to try to get a Samwise moment where your character realizes that you didn't bring any rope and you really need some rope, kind of thing, which is also like negated nowadays by 5th edition. Like, once again, earning the advanced name, you have to buy every last little piece of equipment you have, from every last candle that you want to carry to matches to your clothing, all that kind of stuff. Whereas 5th edition, like, hands you an equipment pack that's full of everything you can conceivably need to get through any adventure in any dungeon. Don't worry, you already have rope. You start off with the giant backpack full of equipment. They might as well also like give you 1,000 gold coins and a gem full of, a bag full of gems. For everything else, they're just kind of handed like every character gets a random magic item to start off with. That's all like Dragon Slayer level kind of shit and higher. And like I said, that'll be like what D&D Evolution is, maybe. Like, everyone starts off, you just automatically get 18 in every score. There'll be no racial modifiers. After all, it's like you can pretty much play anything now, and the best way to just make sure everyone feels like they're being treated equally is just give everyone the exact same attributes right out the door. And I guess they'll they'll have to figure out some way to fight something. Maybe it'll be more like a kid's video game. Like, instead of like getting into combat against goblins, in order to be able to get to the treasure, you gotta like jump over like glowing yellow bricks and collect mushrooms or something. I don't know. Like, can you write a D&D story that's based on the plot of an episode of Teletubbies? Kind of a thing. I don't know. Anyway, that's, I guess, all besides the point. Like 5th edition is certainly streamlined, but it's kind of like it's fully loaded, and I don't know. It's one of those things that I do find that like is like a lacking in the experience of 5th edition. But like, to someone I can never see it as someone who's brand new to role playing games and it's their very first role playing game. I'm never going to be able to have that experience with that game. For me, like I'm an old dog who played a lot in my youth and then went away and then came back at some point. But it just, there's always something like I felt like it was lacking, and this very much, I guess, is kind of, like what that really is. Wizards of the Coast from the get-go has been trying to give you a more perfect product. Like, consider the kind of company they are. I mean, TSR is kind of like originally like kind of like a, seat of your pants, like, garage kind of company, just like Apple was in its original days, and a lot of things that are like emerged out of the 70s that have survived until now kind of were when they first started out. Wizards of the Coast is, because of being owned by Hasbro and a multitude of other reasons, is a much more slick operation. Their whole focus was on like selling lots of tiny product. Is one of the things I noticed about 4th edition, and that kind of also like why it kind of ultimately turned me off of it is the whole way that they wed the rules so strongly to the miniatures and all that other stuff. Is like, what a wonderful way for them to keep selling you little accoutrements, because you'll have to buy more and more minis in order to be able to have any kind of variety with the villains you're fighting. You'll need different kinds of dungeon tiles to recreate different kinds of environments if you want people to go through a little adventure scenario. You look at the adventure scenarios written for 4th edition, and they're all designed for tournament kind of play in a large public setting, but like, I guess that's just the way things were during that window of time when fourth edition came out. Perhaps, you know, like the convention and local comic book shop, you know, game night kind of scene was all that was kind of keeping the fire lit there in the darkness. When myself and apparently a lot of other people went away from gaming. So I don't think I'm in my own way alone, even if my own reasons are my own. Perhaps everyone else had their own reasons too. But now we're all back and trying to look for the perfect experience. And you know, as long as like they have the old things in print, you know, you might as well take advantage of it. You know, I noticed like of the OSR games I have looked at, and obviously no, I have not looked at all of them because there's a lot of them. You know, the ones I've looked at come close to recreating what this does, but there's some like a weird kind of creep of some of Wizards of the Coast modern kind of stuff that's still kind of crept in there. Like THAC0's not as bad as you think, guys. Think of it as like the difference in terms of how the rules feel to you as the player, because you're actually, you know, having to do the dice. Like the way modern D&D is you're wanting to roll high and add a bonus. So it's almost like basketball where you're trying to like jump up and shoot high to get something up and over something. THAC0 is more like a mobile targeting reticule where you both like you want to jump up higher than this low number, but you also like have this thing that's kind of pushing it down and causing it to wave kind of a thing because of the randomness. And like I said, it's not like a perfect, but it's close, and it's why you see that kind of stuff in video games. Golf comes to mind. Golf video games seem to like to use that kind of dynamic. But, you know, like, the whole trick to THAC0 is it's trying to tell you what number you got to roll over easier. It's basically based on your level. Like, the chart's, like, not all that hard to find and follow once you know where it is. I mean, there are such a things as indexes and tables of contents. I know, like, everything seems weird to you younglings who are used to being able to just, like, Siri, find this. But, you know, like, that there are ways to navigate books quickly, especially once you get used to where they are. You can just, you know, like, you get the feel of it, you know, just pick it up and practice with it. They're not harmful. They kind of smell good, especially when they're new. They're lovely. They're lovely little things. If there's, I guess, any disadvantage to going on Drive-Thru RPG and buying old AD&D stuff is that Wizards of the Coast is still getting the money for it, even though they're also bitching about how horrible all these games were, and they're a product of a dark age of human insanity and madness, a land of cannibalism and fear as none has ever seen before upon this earth, and all that kind of stuff. Whatever that disclaimer they have on Drive-Thru RPG and all the AD&D stuff reads as. But, you know, like, you know, you're going to turn down the opportunity to not, like, have to go try to find one on eBay that's in who knows what kind of condition. You can get, like, at least, like I said, it's cheap comparatively to the new stuff, and it gives you much more product. Yeah, it's a little harder to navigate, and you know, like maybe a few more rules to have to keep track of because ability scores each are kind of doing their own thing as opposed to each doing the exact same thing. In many ways, like 5th edition, like the entire rule system is basically run off the attack dynamic now because everything is trying to shoot over a difficulty number with a die roll and a bonus to that die roll. Like it's the same dynamic used for savings throws as is used for accomplishing skills and as is used for, you know, making an attack. So it's like the entire game just kind of feels like you're attacking everything in a weird way. Whereas, you know, like, you know, people complain maybe perhaps about the amount of like other kinds of dice you have to use in this kind of game where some things you're rolling a die 20 under a number in order to be able to accomplish your skills because they're based off your ability score, or if you're a thief suddenly you're having to use a bunch of percentile dice. You know, like the different kind of ways you stop and use dice and having to stop and kind of do the math in your head to figure out what you're doing in a way kind of like subconsciously conveys the difference in how the various actions would feel if the character is doing them. Like swinging a sword, it shouldn't feel the same as sewing something or talking, you know, or dodging out of the way of some lava. You know, so the dice dynamics should feel a little different. You know, they're using your pick lock skill. You're having to roll percentage dice and stop. You're rolling multiple dice. You're having to stop and like, okay, wait a minute, which one was high? Okay, so I rolled a 23 and stop and look. Well, in a way, you know, like that's all kind of like replicating the tension and focus it takes to like stop and, you know, do any of those kinds of things, you know. Whereas also I feel like that's why a lot of the real reason why a lot of weapons have such different damage ranges. Like different kinds of dice kind of feel slightly different when you roll them, so that the heft and feel of lobbing a heavy broadsword with a die 8 feels differently than rolling a rinky dinky little die 4 for your dagger, you know, or you know, a sword something that gives you like 2 die 6, you know, it feels heavier, you know, kind of a thing. I mean, you know, it is what it is. I don't know why everyone acts like just because it's old, like somehow it's become dysfunctional. I sometimes feel like it's some sort of like weird thing that happens with people where it's like, oh, they're not going to be putting out any more books for it anymore. Well, I can't play that now. It's like, what, there's not enough material out there to use? There's tons. Like people ran this for years. Whatever new rules developments have happened that you've gotten used to, and you might that and things that you might find that are too arcane about how these rules are from the old days, like they function perfectly fine. People gamed off this shit for like close to a decade. Like, you know, you can't say that's not functional. In the same way when people like attack Palladium and say their game's dysfunctional, it's like, no, it's not. People have been playing Palladium for decades. Like that, you don't do that with a terribly dysfunctional rule system. So I guess, yeah, there's my observations on Advanced Dungeons and Dragons after having made a few Dark Sun characters. The end. Stay waspinated.